Let me start with you, Nick. I want to ask you about your thinking about the connection between Christian universities, Christian scholarship, and shalom. And you've written in various places that the job of a Christian university, a Christian college, should be more than just to help its students learn to appreciate high culture, learn to appreciate the beauty of art, poetry, and so forth, but that it should be to train students to be responsible citizens in society, and in particular to be agents of shalom in society. And you've suggested too, I know, that Christian scholarship can play a similar role, that Christian writing and researching can play a role in helping to bring healing to a world of suffering. And so I wondered if you could talk to us some about that. How can Christian scholarship play that kind of role?
Sure, happy to, Tom. Though maybe before I do, I should, because people have sometimes misunderstood what I wanted to say here. Before I do that, I should maybe emphasize that I am in fact a defender of the liberal arts. In fact, years ago, when I was a professor at Calvin College, I was chair of a committee on liberal arts education in the Christian college. In retrospect, I didn't know very well what liberal arts was. I struggled to find a definition for it. I read what other people had said and so forth. But then one day I was reading around almost accidentally and reading in some essays by Talcott Parsons, the prominent sociologist at Harvard in the 30s and early 40s. Parsons said, almost as a throwaway line, something like this, that a feature of modern societies is that we have an enormous inheritance of culture which did not originate within our society, and consequently does not have direct, for the most part, does not have direct functional use. And that just struck me as perfectly obvious once it's said, but it hadn't occurred to me that we really are inheritors of a vast stretch of philosophy and theology and poetry and literature and art and so forth, which originated back in the ancient Greeks or medievals or whatever. And I do think it's enormously important for human beings in general, and Christians in particular, to be introduced to that enormously rich and diverse and profound, whatever, you don't like the term stream very well, but anyway, inheritance of culture. So I do want to affirm that. But then comes the but.
Comes the what?
The but.
The but, okay, right.
So I hear lament from, I'm retired now, but I used to hear laments from many of my colleagues about the introduction of professional education into the Christian colleges and universities. And a lot of my colleagues represented that as, oh, here it goes again, the administration is giving in to pressure, they think they need it for financial purposes and all of that. I always thought it was less manipulative than that. It seems to me that business in the modern world has become a knowledge-intensive profession. And there are good reasons why colleges have programs in business nowadays, whereas 50 years ago it seemed perfectly okay to have a high school degree and go into your father's business. So I never thought it was just cynical manipulation on the part of administrations. I thought that there was a social rationale behind it. So I'm also a defender of appropriate introduction of professional programs. However, I think that there's, and this is what you're referring to, I think there's something, as it were, in between those two that should be an important component of Christian higher education, colleges and universities. And yes, I think that our calling as Christians in the world can be put in various ways, but one way is to put it like this, that our calling is to be agents and witnesses of God's shalom, of human flourishing in all dimensions, with respect to each other, respect to ourselves, with respect to God, with respect to nature. And I think the Christian college is called to advance that, to equip students to play that role of citizen in God's kingdom and citizen in our civil societies. And it does this then by engaging, let's face it, in social analysis and the requisite, providing the requisite information. So I've seen a big part of my career as a philosopher basically shaped by that. I had some confrontational experiences with injustice, gross injustice, in South Africa and in Palestine. And those energized me to think hard about justice. Sometimes practical applications in an earlier book of mine, more or less practical applications, and more recently more theoretical inquiry into what constitutes justice. And I think that's just an important part of the calling of the Christian College, to enable us to be agents of shalom. Let me give two more examples. A year and a half ago, I was invited by a group of young fellows at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester to give some talks about justice and medicine. At first, I was powerfully inclined to say, no, I haven't thought about that. But they said they used some flattery. They said that they'd been reading my book about justice and they had found it very provocative and they really did want me to come and talk about it. So I did, but I felt inadequate. Yes, I'd thought about the theory, but what we really need here is a combination of theory with, well, let me just call it social analysis. A second example, about 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk on just punishment. That invitation came 9 months ago, and again, I was inclined to beg out of it because, though I've written about justice, it's mainly primary justice and not corrective justice. But here it went again. They said they'd been reading my book on justice, and so they wanted me to talk about it. So I said, okay. And I did, and I think had some decent things to say about it. But again, I felt inadequate. I didn't know the hands-on stuff the way a lot of people in that room did. And so once again, I was persuaded that a really important part, I think, of the Christian college curriculum is in between pure liberal arts and in between professional education, to give us an analysis of the dynamics of punishment in society, medicine in society from a Christian standpoint, with a Christian understanding of justice, charity, and so forth. That you see what I mean? That sort of in-between project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Al, have you thought about these issues?
No, I haven't thought about them nearly as much as as Nick has. But I certainly agree with Nick that it's the part of the Christian to be an agent of shalom, of God's shalom. This is what's involved in loving one's neighbor as oneself, and it's part of the intellectual community, intellectual Christian community, to do whatever needs to be done with respect to figuring out how to do that. As you say, that knowledge is involved here in very many respects, so it's important that Christians be working at this, produce this kind of knowledge. It doesn't follow from that this ought to be part of, here I want to be partly just a devil's advocate. It doesn't follow from that it's part of the job of a Christian college just as a college. It's a little like the difference between what goes on in a college on the one hand and what goes on in a university on the other, where you specialize much more deeply in certain things. I'm not sure how much we disagree, and I'm not sure we disagree at all, because, like I say, I'm being a devil's advocate.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know I'd like to know why you think it follows that this should be part of a Christian college.
So I've got no special view as to whether it should be part of undergrad, what parts of it should be undergraduate, what part graduate, and so forth. It's just that when I look back at your and my teachers, college teachers, I think they basically had the attitude, I hope this isn't unfair to them, that if they taught us the basic principles of Christian thought, we could apply them. I now think that that's really inadequate. One has to work hard at those at the intervening steps. It's not enough that I had thought about justice. I was basically well, not completely. I didn't know as much as I wanted to about the health system in the U.S. to talk with any kind of authority to these young guys at Mayo. And I just wished I'd known more, could analyze it and so forth. Yeah. Now, maybe that should be university level. I don't know, but it's not enough to say, we'll give you the principles and then you just go and apply them.
No, because But when we were undergraduates, the question of learning a great deal about the health system probably wouldn't have been very appropriate. It wouldn't have been very, maybe if one wanted to take a certain kind of course in sociology, it would be. But it's one thing to talk about the responsibilities of the Christian academic or intellectual community as a whole, and it's quite a different thing to think about what ought to go into an undergraduate curriculum. And I guess we probably don't disagree on that.
I suppose, but it seems to me if this undergraduate college has a pre-med program, as it did in our day, then it seems to me an important component of that is to invite these students to think about, I don't like the word very well, but the ethical issues involved in the medical profession.
Yes, I think that's right.
Giving them the biology and the chemistry and so forth and saying, okay, now go do it.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.